On Father's Day, I was handed a gift box that looked ordinary, until I heard the hissing sound inside. 10 minutes later, police officers were standing in my living room. What they found turned my family into a nightmare headline of family betrayal. That's how my story begins. A story not about strangers, not about enemies, but about the people I loved most, the people I trusted to carry my name, my legacy, my future, my daughter, her husband, and a box that nearly destroyed everything. If you think family is always safe, always sacred, you're about to face the dark family secrets that prove otherwise. It was a quiet Sunday morning in our suburban neighborhood. The Hendersons across the street were loading their SUV for a picnic. Mrs. Patterson was watering her hydrangeas, the kind of peaceful American suburb you'd see in a Hallmark commercial. I was sipping lukewarm coffee on the porch when the brown UPS truck rolled up. The driver smiled, asked me to sign for a package. He said, "Happy Father's Day." The box was light, about the size of a shoebox, maybe 2 pounds. No return address. Just my name, Richard Hale. I thought maybe it was from my grandchildren, Lily and Ethan. They had asked about Father's Day weeks earlier. I carried it inside, setting it on the same coffee table where inheritance documents had scattered just 6 days before. "Who's it from?" Margaret asked, wiping her hands on a kitchen towel. "No idea," I said, squinting at the label. She leaned closer, then whispered, her voice thin with alarm. "Richard, don't open it." I frowned. "Why not?" She pointed at the cardboard. That's when I saw them, tiny holes, evenly spaced like punctures made deliberately. Breathing holes. My stomach dropped. Then came the sound. A soft, unmistakable hiss. The room turned cold. The morning light felt hostile. Margaret grabbed my arm, her nails digging into my sleeve. "Do you hear that?" I froze. The hiss came again, longer this time. Not imagination, not a trick of the mind. Something alive was inside. Something moving, something angry. I dialed 911 with shaking hands. The dispatcher's voice was calm, but my own cracked as I explained, "We have a suspicious package. It's alive. It's making sounds. No return address. Breathing holes." She said officers would be at our house in 10 minutes. 10 minutes felt like an eternity, with that box sitting 6 feet away, pulsing with hidden menace. Every rustle inside was another dagger in my chest. And here's the truth: in that moment, before I even knew what was in the box, before Officer Brooks arrived, before Animal Control confirmed the creature, I already knew who had sent it. The timing, the malice, the betrayal, it all pointed in one direction. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't a gift. This was Father's Day revenge. 6 days before that box arrived, before the hiss turned our living room into a crime scene, the first crack in my family had already split wide open. It was a Thursday evening, the kind of night when the house should have smelled like dinner, like Margaret's roast chicken, like normal family life. Instead, the air was thick with tension, with the scent of burned coffee and fear. My daughter Victoria sat across from me, her manicured fingers trembling as she clutched a porcelain mug. Caleb lounged beside her on our leather sofa, a smirk stretching across his face as if he were watching a show for his amusement. I was holding a stack of inheritance documents, 30 years of planning, investments, retirement savings. The paper crinkled under my grip. Dad, Victoria's voice broke the silence, sharp as glass. "Do you even understand I need the money now? Not after you die." The words stabbed deeper than any knife. My hand tightened around the papers. 30 years of sacrifice, 3 decades of 12-hour shifts, canceled vacations, missed birthdays, all reduced to a demand delivered without shame. The mug slipped from Victoria's hand, crashing against the hardwood. Coffee splattered across the Persian rug, staining it with brown streaks that looked like blood. She gasped, her face flushing. I wanted to believe it was guilt, but her eyes were hard, determined. Not a daughter begging for help, but a debtor cornering her lender. "Victoria," I said slowly, forcing the words past the lump in my throat, "I am not an ATM. You'll get your inheritance when the time comes." Caleb chuckled, sinking deeper into the sofa. "Come on, Richard," he drawled, deliberately refusing to call me Dad. "She's your only daughter. What's a few thousand to help us out?" A few thousand. Last month, it had been gambling debts. Before that, shopping sprees, credit card bills, emergencies that never ended. Their requests grew bolder each time, like predators testing the strength of a cage. "Help you out." I pushed myself to my feet, my 66-year-old joints groaning. I've been helping you out for 3 years straight. My retirement fund is not your personal bank. Margaret appeared in the doorway, twisting a dish towel in her hands. Please, she whispered. Everyone calm down. We can talk about this reasonably. Reasonably, Victoria snapped, whipping around to face her mother. He's sitting on hundreds of thousands while we're drowning in debt you created, I said quietly. The words cut sharper than I intended, but they were true. For a moment, the room froze. On the mantel above the fireplace, the family photo we'd taken 10 years earlier had been knocked forward. Was it during Victoria's outburst, or had she turned it down deliberately? The silver frame caught the lamplight, reflecting nothing but emptiness. Caleb leaned forward, elbows on his knees, his grin widening into something darker. Look, old man, he said, his tone turning venomous. You're not getting any younger. Why not enjoy sharing your wealth while you're alive to see it appreciated, old man? The disrespect burned. This from a man who had never held a steady job, who lived off my daughter's credit cards and my reluctant generosity. I worked 43 years. I shot back each word like a hammer on stone. 43 years of 12-hour days, missed dinners, canceled vacations. So you could have a comfortable childhood, Victoria. So your mother and I could retire with dignity. Dignity? She laughed, harsh and bitter. What's dignified about hoarding money while your daughter suffers? I stared at her, the designer handbag, the salon fresh highlights, the glittering jewelry, Caleb's brand new sneakers. Their suffering looked remarkably comfortable. Your suffering is self-inflicted, I said, the truth spilling out before I could stop it. Every crisis, every emergency, every desperate plea for money, you created them. The silence stretched taut as piano wire. Margaret stepped fully into the room, her face pale. Richard, she whispered, maybe we should... Should what? Victoria's voice cracked like breaking glass. Should keep enabling his selfishness. Should keep pretending he's a loving father instead of a greedy miser. The accusations struck like blows. Greedy, selfish, unloving. Words I had spent my life trying to disprove through sacrifice. Caleb rose from the sofa, his smirk gone, replaced by something uglier. You know what I think, he sneered. I think you enjoy watching us struggle. Makes you feel powerful, doesn't it? Get out! The command erupted from deep inside me, rough, primal. Both of you, get out of my house. Your house? Victoria's eyes glittered dangerous. This house where I grew up? This house Mom helped pay for. You can't just kick out your own daughter? Watch me, I said, my voice steady. But they didn't move. They stood like predators, catching the scent of weakness, waiting for me to break to write the usual check that bought temporary peace. Not this time. I walked to the front door and pulled it open. Cool night air swept in, carrying the honeysuckle scent from the yard. From somewhere down the street came the sound of laughter, neighbors living ordinary lives, families who weren't tearing each other apart. Victoria, I said without turning, take your husband and leave. Don't come back until you're ready to have a respectful conversation about your financial problems, about solutions that don't involve my wallet. Her heels clicked against the floor, each step like a gunshot. She hissed as she passed. You'll regret this. When you're old and sick and need someone to take care of you, remember this moment. Remember how you chose money over family? Caleb paused at the threshold, leaning close enough for me to smell his cologne. This isn't over, old man, he muttered. Family doesn't abandon family. The door slammed. The windows rattled. The silence that followed weighed heavier than their shouting had. And in that silence, the seed of betrayal was planted. A seed that would bloom 6 days later into a box with breathing holes, into a hiss that still echoes in my nightmares. The night after that fight, the house felt quieter than it had in years. Too quiet. Margaret sat at the kitchen table with her tea untouched, her eyes fixed on the grain of the wood as if she could read an answer there. I went upstairs and pulled out a box I hadn't touched in years, a box of memories, drawings, and photographs of Victoria as a little girl. Stick figures holding hands, a picture of us at the county fair, her toothless grin when she rode on my shoulders. I studied those innocent scribbles and wondered when that child had vanished, when she had been replaced by someone who saw her father not as a protector, but as a paycheck. That's when my phone buzzed on the table. A new message, no name, but the style was instantly recognizable. Dad, I hope you're happy. The kids need winter coats and school supplies, but apparently your precious money is more important than your grandchildren. Don't expect to see them anytime soon. The words hit harder than Victoria's shouting ever could. Lily and Ethan, 8 and 6 years old, the light of our lives now turned into weapons in her arsenal. She knew exactly where to strike. Margaret read the message over my shoulder. Her face crumpled. She wouldn't really. She whispered, though we both knew she would. She had done it before, smaller versions of the same game, keeping the children away for a week, 2 weeks, until we caved and sent money. I typed back quickly, "Don't use the kids for this. We'll help if they need things, but this isn't the way." I hovered over the send button. Margaret's hand stopped mine. "Don't," she said softly. "Every time we answer, it just teaches her it works." The silence between us deepened. I thought about all the Christmas mornings we had spent spoiling Victoria every birthday when we scraped together money for gifts we couldn't afford. The dollhouse she had begged for at 7, the car on her 16th birthday, ballet lessons, summer camps, brand-name clothes so she wouldn't feel left out. All of it done gladly out of love, and now that love was being twisted into a chain around our necks. Later that week, Margaret tried again to defend her. "Richard, she's desperate," she murmured. "Maybe she really is struggling." "Struggling," I shot back. "Look at her. Designer handbags, salon highlights. Caleb's sneakers cost more than my first month's rent. She isn't struggling. She's addicted to easy money, to manipulating us." Margaret flinched at my harshness, but she didn't argue. Deep down, she knew it too. 2 days later, the phone buzzed again. A picture this time. Lily's backpack torn at the seam, Ethan's sneakers scuffed. The caption read, "Guess you don't care if your grandkids suffer." It wasn't just guilt, it was theater. Stage pose designed to make me crack. The scuff marks on Ethan's shoes looked intentional, like someone had dragged them across pavement. I clenched my teeth. This was no longer need. This was manipulation, a dark family secret masquerading as affection. I showed Margaret. Her hands trembled as she held the phone. "She's using them," she whispered. "She's using her own children." I nodded, my jaw tight. This is family betrayal at its worst. She thinks love is a currency, something she can weaponize. But if we give in again, we're teaching Lily and Ethan that this is normal, that family relationships are just transactions. That night, I sat in my study, staring at the old family photo, the one that had fallen face down during the fight. I lifted it, brushed the dust from the glass, and stared at the frozen smiles inside. Margaret and I, with our arms around a much younger Victoria, a picture of love that no longer existed. I whispered almost to myself, when did love turn into blackmail? The next morning, the phone buzzed again. This time, Victoria's voice on the line, syrupy sweet, the tone she used when she wanted something. "Dad, I'm sorry about the other night," she said. "I didn't mean to upset you. You know we love you. The kids miss you." Her words were honey, but the poison was still there. I waited. Then right on cue, she added, "But the rent is due and Caleb's hours got cut at work. We're really drowning here. If you could just help us out one last time, things would be okay. One last time. Always one last time." I stayed silent, and she filled the void with the sound of fake affection trying to reel me in. "Dad, please. Don't you want to see Lily and Ethan happy? Don't you want to be part of their lives? This isn't about me, it's about them." But it was about her. It had always been about her. As I hung up, my hands shook, not from fear, but from clarity. I finally saw the performance for what it was, a desperate act, a masquerade of affection meant to hide a core of greed and control. This wasn't love. This was extortion wrapped in family ties, a shocking twist in the story of fatherhood. And in that moment, I swore I would never again let my grandchildren be pawns in a game of Father's Day revenge. I sat alone in my study long after the phone had gone silent, after Margaret had gone to bed. The house was still, but my mind wasn't. On the desk before me lay the inheritance documents, pages of careful planning, legal language that should have been about love, about protecting family. Yet to me now, they looked less like a legacy and more like weapons, sharpened edges that my daughter had turned against me. I reached into the bottom drawer and pulled out an old memory box, the kind of thing most parents keep tucked away. Inside were fragments of a life I used to believe in. There was a crayon drawing from when Victoria was 6'3" stick figures, holding hands beneath a crooked sun. She had written our names, Mom, Dad, Me, with the R and Richard backwards. I held the paper in my trembling hands, the waxy colors faded, but still bright enough to stab at my chest. I remembered the night she stayed up past bedtime to finish it, sneaking into our room at dawn to surprise us. Her hair was tangled, her pajamas too short, but her grin was wide as she held out the picture. "It's us forever," she'd said. Back then I believed her. I placed the drawing beside a photograph of her at 8 years old, standing proudly next to the dollhouse I had worked 2 extra months of overtime to afford. Her smile in that picture was pure, uncorrupted joy. The kind of joy that makes a father believe every sacrifice is worth it. I remembered coming home late from the factory, bone-tired, still smelling of grease and sweat, but sneaking into her room to watch her play, listening to the way she gave each tiny doll a voice. I thought about the ballet lessons we scraped to afford, how she twirled awkwardly in the living room while Margaret clapped. I thought about the car for her 16th birthday, the one I sold my prized fishing boat to buy. Every choice I made, every dream I delayed had been for her, for Victoria. Now that same daughter used the word greedy to describe me. Now that same daughter sent texts threatening to withhold my grandchildren unless I paid her bills. Now that same daughter placed a live snake in a box and called it a Father's Day gift. That is the essence of family betrayal, when the love you poured out for decades comes back as venom. The pain of it was almost too much to hold. I pressed my palms against my eyes, but the memories came anyway. Lily and Ethan laughing in the backyard, chasing fireflies while I grilled burgers. Victoria had been sitting there too, scrolling on her phone, half present, half absent. I remembered thinking then that something had shifted, that the little girl who once drew stick figures of us forever had been replaced by someone colder, harder. And yet the cruelest part was that I still loved her. Even as she manipulated me, even as she used my grandchildren as leverage, even as she spat words like miser and selfish in my face, I still loved her. That was the trap. That was the dark family secret. No one warns you about that. Even when your child becomes your enemy, your heart refuses to let go. I turned the family photo back upright on the mantel, staring at the frozen smiles of a life that felt like fiction. Margaret beside me, younger, full of hope. Myself standing taller, prouder, and Victoria, maybe 10 years old, leaning against me with her head on my shoulder. Looking at it now felt like staring at ghosts. How could she look at that same picture and see only leverage? How could she forget the nights I carried her upstairs, when she fell asleep on the couch, the mornings I packed her lunch, the afternoons I shouted myself hoarse from the bleachers at her soccer games? I whispered to the empty room, "When did you stop being my daughter? When did you become this?" The words hung heavy unanswered. On the desk, the inheritance papers rustled slightly in the breeze from the vent. Their legal language blurred as I stared at them, each clause reminding me of the trust I had built, the security I thought I was leaving behind. Instead, they were just more chains she tried to bind me with. Love had become currency. Sacrifice had become debt. Fatherhood had become blackmail. I closed the memory box, but the weight of it lingered on my chest. The little girl who once promised us forever was gone, replaced by a woman who saw only dollar signs when she looked at her father. That realization hurt worse than the hiss inside that package, worse than the snake itself. Because the truth was clear, the snake hadn't just been in the box. It had been growing in my own house for years, and its name was Victoria. When Officer Brooks stepped into our living room, the tension dropped only slightly, as if the uniform itself could absorb some of the fear pressing against my chest. He was tall, steady, the kind of presence that made you believe problems could be solved with procedure. "Show me the package," he said, his voice calm but alert. Margaret pointed toward the coffee table where the box sat like an intruder. The cardboard looked harmless, but we all knew better. Brooks slipped on latex gloves and crouched low, his flashlight beam sweeping over the surface. "You said it was making sounds?" "Yes," I said, my voice hoarse, hissing, "and there are breathing holes." He nodded once, then reached for his radio. "Dispatch Unit 24. I need animal control to 1247 Maple Street. Possible reptile delivery." The words sent another shiver through me. A reptile delivery. This wasn't a prank. This was intentional. Within 20 minutes, a white van pulled into our driveway. The side read Animal Control Services. Out stepped Aaron Miller, a man with the calm efficiency of someone who had seen too many strange things to be rattled by one more. He carried a secure carrier and a set of long-handled tongs. Morning, he greeted us like it was any other day at work. Let's see what we got. He knelt by the coffee table, carefully slicing the tape with a box cutter. The moment the lid lifted, the hiss came again, sharper this time, a sound that scraped against my nerves. Then movement, orange and red scales coiling inside. A corn snake, Aaron said after a quick glance. About 3 feet long. Non-venomous, but you don't ship these things in a box for fun? Someone meant to scare you. He coaxed the snake gently into the secure carrier, clicking it shut with finality. Beautiful animal. Shame it was used for something like this. Margaret exhaled in relief, but I couldn't. My heart hammered as I stared at the empty box. Because I knew without evidence, without proof who had sent it. The timing, the venom, the way it struck at Father's Day itself. This was no coincidence. This was family betrayal weaponized into scales and hiss. Officer Brooks turned to me. Do you have any idea who might have sent this? I forced my voice steady. Maybe kids pulling a prank. He narrowed his eyes slightly as if measuring the lie. Unlikely. Takes planning. Access to animals. Knowledge of your address. That's when the memory hit me, my credit card statement from 3 weeks ago. A charge I had noticed but brushed aside. Reptile Palace. $127.50. At the time I told myself maybe it was something for Lily or Ethan, some science project, a petting zoo visit. But now the truth clawed at me. Victoria had access to my card for emergencies. She had used it not for medicine, not for groceries, but for this. My throat went dry. My mind screamed the truth, but my lips stayed shut. If I spoke it aloud, it would become too real. When the officers left, Margaret sank onto the couch, burying her face in her hands. Richard, she whispered. What if it was her? I didn't answer. I walked into my office, closed the door, and sat at my computer. The glow of the screen felt cold against my face as I opened my online banking portal. Every password, every login was muscle memory. I moved with the precision of a man on a mission. First, I checked the credit card account. There it was, clear as day, Reptile Palace, $127.50, authorized by Victoria. Proof undeniable. My stomach twisted. My daughter had bought the snake that hissed at me on Father's Day. The anger burned hot for a moment, then cooled into something sharper. Not rage, not grief. Resolution. I clicked into the settings. Manage users. Victoria's name appeared under authorized access, a relic of her college years when we told ourselves it was for emergencies. I hovered over the option, remove authorized user. For 10 seconds, I stared, not because I doubted, but because I knew this was the point of no return. Then I clicked. Confirm. The system responded in neutral blue text, user access revoked. Changes will take effect within 1 business hour. Next came the automatic payments. Every month for years, money bled from my account into hers, rent insurance subscriptions. I canceled them one by one, each confirmation a nail sealing the coffin of my misplaced generosity. As I worked, a strange calm settled over me. My hands didn't shake. My breath didn't quicken. For the first time in decades, I felt control returning. When I finished, I leaned back in my chair. The inheritance documents still lay on the desk. Their words unchanged, but their meaning transformed. They no longer represented love twisted into obligation. They represented boundaries. The snake in the box had been a message. But tonight I sent one back. This is not a bank. This is not a prison. This is my life. And tomorrow my daughter would learn that the era of easy money was over. This was the beginning of my own Father's Day revenge. The morning after I cut her off, the silence didn't last long. At exactly 8:15, the phone rang. Victoria's name flashed across the caller ID, and for a moment I stared at it, knowing this was the moment she would discover the walls I had finally built. I answered with calm I didn't feel. Good morning, Victoria. Her voice came shrill, panicked, already half accusing. Dad, what have you done? My card isn't working. The rent payment bounced. The car insurance, everything's gone. What is happening? I took a slow sip of coffee. Victoria. I know about the snake. I know what you did for Father's Day. The line went quiet. Then came the shift, the defensive fury. You've lost your mind. How could you accuse me of something like that? But behind her performance, I heard it. A low chuckle muffled male. Caleb. Not the laugh of surprise, but of satisfaction. A man laughing at his own cleverness. That sound was the final confirmation I needed. I ended the call before my voice could betray me. But I knew they would come. People like them don't accept boundaries, they attack them. By mid-morning, the sound of an engine roared into our driveway. Tires screeched, doors slammed. Margaret froze in the kitchen doorway, eyes wide. Heavy footsteps marched toward our porch. The doorbell rang once sharp, then again more insistent. Then fists pounded against the wood. I stood feeling oddly calm. "Stay here," I told Margaret. "No," she said firmly. "We face this together." When I opened the door, Victoria and Caleb stood there like an invading army. Victoria's face was flushed crimson, her hair wild, her eyes burning. Caleb loomed behind her, arms crossed, jaw clenched with menace. "Dad," Victoria said, her voice shaking with rage, "we need to talk." "We already talked," I replied evenly, blocking the doorway. And I was clear. Clear. She laughed harshly, the sound devoid of humor. "You were insane. You cut me off over some ridiculous misunderstanding about a Father's Day package." "There's no misunderstanding," I said coldly. "You sent me a snake." And I responded appropriately. Caleb stepped forward, his bulk filling the space between us. "Look, old man, maybe you didn't think this through. Victoria has expenses, responsibilities. Kids need things. Kids," I repeated, my voice a blade. "Kids whose mother uses them as bargaining chips. Kids whose father laughs while a snake is shipped to my doorstep." Victoria's face twisted with fury. "Fine," she hissed. "You want to play hardball? You'll never see Lily and Ethan again. They'll grow up knowing their grandfather chose money over family." The words that once would have gutted me now rang hollow. I stared at her, not the little girl in the crayon drawings, not the smiling child beside a dollhouse, but the stranger who stood on my porch with venom in her veins. "That's not a threat," I said, quietly, each word deliberate. "That's a blessing." The shock on her face was instant. For once, her weapon had missed its mark. Caleb's mouth fell open, disbelief painted across his features. Margaret stepped up beside me, then her hand slipping into mine, her voice steady. "We're done living under your threats." Caleb leaned in close, his breath hot with anger. "We know where you live. We know your routines. Maybe you should reconsider before this gets ugly." I didn't flinch. "Are you threatening me? I'm saying family relationships work both ways," he sneered. "You cut us off, don't expect us to disappear quietly." "Actually," I replied, voice calm as stone, "that's exactly what I expect. And if you don't, it becomes a police matter, not a family one." Victoria grabbed his arm, but instead of pulling him back, it only fueled his anger. "You think you're so smart," Caleb spat. "Cutting off the money doesn't make you powerful." "We'll find other ways." "Like jobs?" I asked dryly. "It's a novel idea. People have been supporting themselves that way for centuries." Victoria's eyes blazed. "You'll regret this. Family doesn't abandon family. There are already consequences," I said. "You're living them right now." For a long moment, we stared at one another across the threshold, me standing in the doorway of the home I had built. They standing outside, furious that their key to my life had been revoked. And in that silence, the truth was undeniable. This wasn't about love. This wasn't about survival. This was about control, and they had just lost it. Without another word, Victoria spun on her heel, her heels cracking against the porch steps like gunshots. Caleb lingered, his glare heavy with unspoken threats, before finally following. Their car screeched out of the driveway, the engine revving louder than necessary, as if noise alone could reclaim the power they lost. When the sound faded, I closed the door and locked it. Margaret's hand squeezed mine. Her eyes filled not with fear, but with pride. We stood there in the quiet, the walls of our home holding steady around us. The war wasn't over, but the tide had turned. And for the first time, I felt the sharp edge of victory, not in shouting, not in violence, but in the refusal to bow to a dark family secret. The morning after Victoria and Caleb stormed out the house felt both heavier and lighter at the same time. Heavier because the echo of their threats still lingered in the walls. Lighter because, for once, Margaret and I had not given in. We drank coffee in silence, the quiet broken only by the clink of her spoon against the cup. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost hesitant. "Richard, what happens now?" I had been asking myself the same question. For 30 years, I believed love meant sacrifice. I thought being a father meant solving problems, paying bills, catching every fall. But now, standing at the edge of my own retirement, I realized that sometimes love meant building walls, not tearing them down. Now I said we protect ourselves. We protect our future. And we protect Lily and Ethan from growing up thinking manipulation is normal. By 9 o'clock, I was in the downtown office of Helen Carter, our family lawyer of 15 years. Her office smelled of leather and old books, walls lined with legal volumes that seemed older than time. She adjusted her glasses as I laid the manila folder of documents on her mahogany desk. "Richard," she said gently, "what's been happening?" I told her everything. The inheritance fight, the threats, the snake in the box, the confrontation on my doorstep. Each detail hardened her expression until she leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "This goes beyond a family disagreement," she said firmly. "What you've described is harassment, intimidation. We need to address this on multiple fronts. The first front was the will. I wanted Victoria out completely. No loopholes, no second chances, no manipulations. I want my money to go to Lily and Ethan's education," I said. "College tutoring, books, legitimate expenses. But not a penny to Victoria or Caleb." Helen nodded. "That's a wise decision. We'll create an educational trust fund. An independent trustee will manage it, releasing funds only for documented school-related costs. That way your grandchildren are provided for without giving their parents control." Hearing it laid out like that sent a wave of relief through me. For the first time in months, I felt like I was making a decision that gave instead of enabling. Victoria wanted control. She wanted the inheritance to be a lifeline for her bad choices. Instead, it would become a lifeline for her children's future. The second front was protection. Helen pulled out a fresh pad of legal paper. "We need to document everything. The threatening language, the snake, the confrontation at your door. We'll file for a restraining order today. Once granted, any attempt at contact becomes a legal matter, not a family argument." The words tasted bitter but necessary. A restraining order against my own daughter. I had never imagined my life would come to this. But then again, I had never imagined she would send me a live snake either. Margaret squeezed my hand under the desk. Her eyes glistened, torn between grief and resolve. I knew what she was thinking. This wasn't just a legal act. It was an acknowledgement that our daughter was gone, that the little girl in the crayon drawings no longer existed. Helen's assistant brought in the prepared documents. Page after page slid across the desk, the legal language stark and impersonal. With every signature I made, I felt a door close, but also a window open. A door shutting on years of exploitation, a window opening toward a future where Margaret and I could finally live without fear of the next demand, the next threat, the next emergency. I signed the new will. I signed the trust fund paperwork. I signed the restraining order petition. Each signature was a declaration, no more. When we left Helen's office, the sunlight on the street felt different, brighter, sharper, as though the world itself was acknowledging the shift. Margaret slipped her arm through mine. "Do you think she'll understand what she's lost?" she asked quietly. "She will," I said, "but by the time she realizes, it will be too late." At home, I sat in my study again, staring at the family photo that had been turned face down. I left it that way this time. It no longer felt like denial. It felt like truth. That photo was a memory, not a reality. The snake in the box had been meant to terrify me. Instead, it became the final push I needed. Victoria thought she was sending a message of power. What she didn't realize was that she had written her own exile. This was the consequence of family betrayal. This was the shocking twist of a true story. And this was my Father's Day revenge. Not violence, not shouting, but the cold permanence of law. 2 days after Helen Carter filed the paperwork, her call came through. "Richard," she said, "the restraining order was served this afternoon. Both Victoria and Caleb have received copies. It's official." I thanked her, then hung up and sat still for a long time. The phone felt heavier than usual in my hand, as though it carried the weight of 30 years of history. Margaret walked into the room, drying her hands on a dish towel. "Well," she asked. "It's done," I said simply. She sat beside me, her shoulders slumping with relief and sorrow all at once. That evening, I poured myself a glass of water and left my phone on the counter. Notifications lit up the screen, blocked calls, text messages that never reached me, each one marked restricted by court order. The technology translated cruelty into silence. For years, I had dreaded the buzz of that phone, never knowing if it would bring another crisis, another plea, another guilt-soaked demand. Now the silence was louder, but it was also merciful. I picked up the phone once, scrolled through the missed attempts. The words were cut off, truncated by the system, but I could guess what they said. Maybe accusations, maybe threats, maybe another round of, "You'll never see the kids again." For the first time, I didn't care. The law stood between us now. Her words no longer had claws. Later, when the house was quiet, I opened the memory box again. Inside was the old family photo, the one from the county fair. Victoria sat on my shoulders, grinning wide, a cotton candy stick in her hand. She must have been 5 or 6. Her cheeks were round, her eyes bright with the kind of innocence that believed parents were invincible. I held that photo until my hands shook. Margaret came in and found me there. She didn't scold, didn't say a word. She simply placed her hand on my shoulder and stood in silence. We both stared at the frozen smiles, knowing the girl in that picture no longer existed. The grief was strange, like mourning someone who was still alive. She breathed, she walked, she sent texts filled with venom. But the daughter I remembered, the child who once whispered, "I love you," when I tucked her into bed, that child was gone. I whispered to the photo, "What happened to you, Victoria? When did love become currency? When did family become leverage?" No answer came, of course, just silence. The silence of a house free from her chaos. The silence of blocked messages. The silence that followed decades of noise. Margaret finally broke it. "Maybe this is reconciliation," she said quietly. "Not the kind we wanted, not hugs or forgiveness, but the kind where we finally accept what she's become and move on." Her words stung, but they were true. This was our reconciliation, not with Victoria, but with reality, with ourselves, with the truth that love has limits and boundaries are sometimes the only way left to protect it. I put the photo back into the box, closing the lid gently, as though it were a coffin. It felt final. Not angry, not bitter, just final. The next morning, I looked out the window as the neighborhood came alive. The Henderson kids rode their bikes. Mrs. Patterson watered her garden. Life was ordinary, steady, untouched by dark family secrets. And for once, my own home felt like part of that peace. The missed texts kept coming, piling up in silence, but I stopped checking them. Victoria could scream into the void all she wanted. The law ensured her voice could no longer reach me. That was its own kind of healing. This was indirect reconciliation, not through words spoken face to face, not through tears and apologies, but through acceptance, through distance, through the knowledge that some wounds can only be managed, not cured. I kissed Margaret's forehead that night and whispered, "We did everything we could. The rest is hers now." And as I lay in bed, the silence of my phone beside me, I realized this was the closest thing to peace I was ever going to get. The days that followed carried a strange peace. Our neighborhood returned to its gentle rhythm. The Henderson kids laughed as they played basketball in the driveway. Mrs. Patterson hummed to herself while watering her roses. The distant sound of lawnmowers and birdsong layered into the familiar hum of suburban life. It looked like nothing had changed, but inside me, everything had. I no longer jumped when the phone buzzed. I no longer woke in the middle of the night calculating how much of my retirement I could sacrifice to keep Victoria afloat for just one more month. The house itself felt lighter, as though the walls had been holding their breath for years and could finally exhale. I would be lying if I said the pain was gone. The grief of losing a daughter not to death but to betrayal is a wound that never truly heals. But I had accepted that healing doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it means distance. Sometimes it means boundaries. Sometimes it means protecting the life you have left rather than trying to resuscitate what has already died. As I stood by the window watching the late afternoon sunlight bathe the quiet street in gold, the lesson of it all became clear. Love without limits becomes slavery, and boundaries are the truest form of love you can give to yourself and to those who come after you. This was my story of family betrayal. This was my Father's Day revenge, not with fists or fury, but with clarity, law, and the courage to finally say no. And now I want to ask you, what would you have done if you were me? Could you cut ties with someone you love knowing it was the only way to survive? Or would you keep sacrificing until nothing was left? Tell me in the comments below. Your thoughts matter more than you think, and I read every single one. If this story made you feel something, anger, sadness, relief, save it, share it, let it spark a conversation. And if you want more true stories of betrayal, dark secrets, and shocking twists, subscribe right now so you don't miss what comes next. Because sometimes survival means telling the story out loud and letting others decide what they would do when love turns into a weapon.